More often than not, it drives me insane how little women seem to know about the experiences an average guy goes through or doesn't go through. I don't mean to criticize women. These days, most men are well aware of the struggles women face, and that's a good thing. But the other way around? Almost nothing. What's your experience? Story 1. Firstly, it is because they are not men. It is the same as us not understanding them and their everyday struggles. Secondly, we do not talk about it a lot as men. We are not as emotionally vulnerable with each other, let alone other women. It is hard for them to know when we do not share. Finally, society deems it an issue to talk about men's issues publicly, which is also part of the problem. There is very little support in government around men's mental health. Again, this is similar to the above point of it not being spoken about. It is hard for people to know if it is not talked about. There is also a sad reality that if we are talking about men's reality and issues, then we are detracting from women's, which is simply not true. Story 2. As a person considered old by most of Reddit, my experience has been that, in general, 1. The younger a person is, the more certain they are of everything they think they know. Young people don't know much. This is true no matter how you define young. My definition of that word has changed over the decades. Most people of any age have no idea what it's like to be anyone else. The older you are, the more you understand that fact and the more you'll focus on common ground with people as we all muddle through and try to get by. I readily admit there are massive exceptions to these observations, as there are narcissists, mild psychopaths, unempathetic autistic individuals, and boorish people in every generation. And social media gives them a microphone with an algorithm that boosts angry posts. Story 3. Because we are dimorphic beings, there are measurable differences between men and women. Neurological, biological differences, the way our brains work, what works better for one and less so for the other. Then there's a lot of stuff that's imprinted on us, the sociocultural side of men and women, what it means for some to be a man or a woman, what quantifiers are there. The thing is, we don't know each other's reality because even if we talked it out, it would never equate to the actual physical presence of the experience or mode of function. For example, I was born a man, I've always lived as a man, the experiences I have are those of a man. I'm not a woman, I've never lived as a woman. While I might empathize or even understand in words a woman's experience, I'll never truly be able to grasp the full amount of what's being told to me because I didn't experience it the same way. Same thing for women understanding us. Story 4. Feels like a rage bait post, but I'll respond in good faith. The women in my life are more aware of the struggles of men than those who are stereotypically perpetually online. However, online the loudest voices you hear are the perpetually aggrieved who find it offensive to even hear suggestions that they are not the only ones facing struggles. The reality of their life is probably not one that is rich with care and compassion, which is where the empathy void comes from. The women in my life care about male suicide, care about their dads, sons, and brothers, and don't like the hostility their sons will face in life for being, well, sons. The men in my life care about women's aspirations and safety, and that their sisters and daughters face the fear of a potential rapist or murderer. If it wasn't for the internet, if you lived my life, you wouldn't even know there was a gender war. Story 5. I don't think men can put themselves in women's reality either. It is not a gendered problem, but more of a lack of awareness of others beyond yourself. If lucky, opposite-sex kids force some awareness onto some people because then it indirectly affects them. Story 6. You'll never truly understand the things that you haven't experienced. This is true for everything and everybody. However, there is a significant difference in the awareness levels of men and women about each other's problems. This is mainly because most men do not speak up or draw clear boundaries with women. Story 7. I don't know, man. I keep a pretty low profile, so my girlfriend wouldn't know much about my existence if I were not to tell her. I don't try to assume what she thinks of me without asking. Ultimately, whatever she thinks matters and nobody else. Story 8. I only found out a couple of years ago. I was watching a YouTube video where they read replies from a question on Reddit. The question was about the struggles that men face. The answers horrified me. I can't believe that those kinds of things go on in modern society. It's like women get the good from their traditional role, and the good that comes from breaking free from it, while men get the bad end of both. Just in case no one told you guys this recently, your feelings matter, your value doesn't come from doing stuff for women, and you're an awesome person. Story 9-1. They aren't men, hence will have different life experiences. No different than a rich person not knowing a poor person's reality. Many don't care to know or they think they know it all. Whether they watch The View, follow specific politicians and influencers, or certain sites and shows targeted towards women, many think they know what it is to be a man. In most cases, when corrected, they either won't accept it or call you a liar. All because they don't have the humility to admit they are wrong. Story 10. Because it doesn't matter to them. They are in their own little world. And the thought of caring about a man's struggles in life is absolutely a foreign concept. Story 11. A. Because they are not men. Because men are just starting to become vocal about this topic. And C. Women seem to miss the concept that while the top of society is statistically male, a regular guy is not at the top of society. Story 12. Because there's no average guy. We're all different and experience the world differently. One man may be upset that he doesn't have a relationship and blames women, while another also has trouble dating but isn't angry at others and blames himself instead. So, something a woman learns about one man won't necessarily apply to another. Story 13. I'm a man, and even I have no idea what the reality of the average man is. Who do you think the average man is, and what do you think their struggles are about? Every time I try to learn about it, it takes 5 minutes to reach the point where I would rather not continue, because I don't engage with all that searing bitterness. Story 14. If you are basing this all on whatever you see online, then sure, but the average woman is about as empathetic about the struggles of the average man as the average man is empathetic towards the struggles of the average woman. Story 15. I guess my experiences in reality are not as bleak, pessimistic, horrible, and sad as I am reading other guys are doing. Is the average guy really doing that bad? Or are folks just louder online? Maybe women would know more about it if dudes had more platonic lady friends. Also, men's struggles come from ourselves perpetuating toxic masculinity. We have to be kinder to ourselves. Story 16. I'll just say this since it's been recently brought up in my own life. Growing up, when I had problems, my parents had two solutions. My dad's would be to punch the kid in the nose who was being the problem, and my mom would just say I wear my emotions on my sleeve and to essentially not show them. That was pretty much all the help I ever got growing up. While it did teach me to be completely independent, I've recently learned that being that independent comes with some pretty major downsides. Story 17. My niece once said men have no idea what it's like to feel unsafe and at risk for men in bars and on the street. I had to explain that young men were nearly 10 times more likely to experience violence from other men. She was absolutely amazed and dumbfounded that this was the case. I asked how many girls she'd seen punched in the face by men compared to men being punched by men. I know most violence against women is done away from sight. However, men are much more likely to encounter violence in all walks of life. Story 18. Anytime any man tries to talk about their experience, it's minimized. Women have it worse. They are lumped with the appalling misogynists or told that they can't have any problems because of male privilege. By contrast, we have had over 50 years of feminism as a political and social force highlighting and publicizing women's struggles. Story 19. MWM put it best. Women are human beings. Men are human doings. Anytime something adversely affects men, they are going to repackage the problem in a way that keeps the gender disadvantage focus on women. Always. Man-woman myth, also known as Roland Agelagun. Story 20. Good evening. I am happy to read this subject. Personally, I work in support, and often the first thing I say to men when they walk through the door of my office is, "Thank you," because I realize to what extent it is not really the culture in our societies. Yes, those bad and old tenacious beliefs of man must be strong, he must ensure material security. That you are just as human as we are, so you too have your experience and especially your epigenetic heritage, one of my specialties. And as for the reasons your parents, great-grandparents, the men who preceded you and potentially kept a certain modesty, okay, well, how can I put it? You have them broad shoulders because you have things to bear without knowing it. So thank you for taking care of us, poor little defenseless things who are going to be attacked on every street corner. I'm kidding, but some speeches are not very far from that. But personally, I would like you to be able to do as much as we do without asking questions. After all, is it really a question of gender? No, I don't think so. Simply from the awareness that we live experiences in our lives, emotions that we need to question in order to understand them and know ourselves better, and that seems quite universal to me. So thank you for this post. Story 21. No one can know about another's lived experience because they haven't lived it. The closest they can get is to hear their stories and empathize. But if those stories aren't told, that can't happen. Story 22. Speaking as a woman here. Men will get berated by women for sharing certain things that women can share much more freely. For example, I have seen countless times men say, "I do the majority of the household work or childcare," and women will often respond with, "That's part of being in a relationship," or, "You're a husband or parent, it's your responsibility." But if women say the same thing, they are treated with much more empathy and compassion. I am speaking from my personal experiences. There is an enormous double standard that exists that we, as women, need to be mindful of. Listening, being less judgmental, and enacting a rule of no double standards goes a long way. Story 23. My experience is that almost all women are completely clueless. It's not all their fault, though. We know about the experiences of women because they spoke up. They organized, educated, and got political. We need to do the same. It's already happening somewhat, so I expect in a generation or two it will be different. Women really started self-advocating in the early 1900s but didn't win politically or culturally until the 1970s. Sure, there was progress along the way, but the 1970s is where the monumental shift happened. Story 24. Do you think every man goes through the same? Do men know what you are going through? Do you know what your mechanic is going through? Your barista? The guy at the traffic light in the next lane? Most men are well aware of the struggles women face. Tip of the iceberg, really. That ignorance is not a men versus women thing, it's people versus people. There's a big difference between knowing all the things someone might go through in principle versus realizing that they are barely holding up. Story 25. Men will never truly understand what women go through, and women will never truly understand what men go through. You can try to understand as best as possible, but until you actually walk that path, it's very hard to truly understand. That being said, we have been conditioned since the beginning of time to believe that men don't really have any issues. If they do, they just endure it because they are men. It is only in recent years that we have become more sensitive to men's mental health issues and emotional aspects of things. Story 26. I would say that it is because it is not their lived experience, and the lack of understanding comes from ignorance and not malice. Men often do not understand the day-to-day experience of women, so it goes both ways. If you want someone to understand something, you need to talk about it and not just feel frustrated. Story 27. It doesn't fit the modern feminism agenda, which is simple. Women are oppressed and men are privileged. They find it hard to comprehend the fact that women have privileges that men don't. Story 28. Speaking as a woman, I can only know what is communicated. We all can do better in that respect. In my defense, I read a lot and learned much, but I also pay attention to podcasts and articles from a male perspective. The tricky part is that everyone is different, and everyone experiences life differently. There are no real rules. All we can do is explain as best as we can and listen as best as we can. Story 29. A lot of issues, such as the pressure to be a breadwinner, to be respected in the community, to obtain a roof over your head, and to get qualifications and promotions, are now shared by a lot of women since many couples have to work. I'm interested in what problems only affect men these days. I think I am guilty of not really being aware of them besides loneliness and men's health. Story 30. Because you have a shallow, generalized view of women and really bad friends? I watch a lot of YouTube essays, and even if the subject is barely relevant, I've heard more than a dozen women mention the men's mental health epidemic, especially where finance is concerned. Sure, some women don't care about men being people. We live in a society. We shouldn't put the responsibility on women to understand and fix us. We are more capable than that. We can be vulnerable with our guy friends, encourage ourselves to open up more, and stop making every reaction a big stupid joke or explosive bout of anger. You'll see a lot of comments from men nodding along, being nasty or negative about women. That's not really going to solve anything. Make better friends. Meet better women who take the time to listen and care about your world. I can sit with my mom, sisters, nurse coworkers, online friends, and talk about struggles they don't understand. But they'll usually let me speak and not even downplay my experiences. We need to care about ourselves first before we start pointing fingers at the opposite sex, because there are still plenty of guys who don't care about women's struggles and, in fact, are completely delusional and pretend no woman has suffered since girl boss was a fad. Story 31. Their own struggles consume them and are more apparent to them on a daily basis, along with ingrained social norms that tell them that men's problems aren't as important.